Professor Henry Louis Gates' program on PBS digs into the lives of African Americans tracing their ancestry. It's called African American Lives. He did this project for talk radio host Tom Joyner. Take a look.
Ruth Griffin was born in South Carolina in 1897. Why she fled South Carolina has long been shrouded in mystery.
Now, Ruth Griffin, your grandmama, had been born and raised in Blackstock, South Carolina. And her family owned land there. Did you know that?
I don't know anything about her background.
Well,
all I know is she left home like he did, and she ended up in Florida, and she didn't stay in touch with her people either.
Well, her family not only owned land, Tom, they owned 130 acres.
They had 130 acres right outside of Columbia?
130 acres outside of Columbia, South Carolina. But do you know why your grandmother moved away?
No.
From a place where they owned so much land and had such deep roots?
I have no idea.
According to the 1930 census, the Griffins had disappeared from Blackstock, South Carolina. Now, we know that Ruth moved to Florida, but what happened to the rest of the family? Two of her brothers were named Meeks and Tom Griffin.
I'm going to show you their death certificates.
Richmond County, Columbia, Meeks Griffin, male, colored, no date of birth, date of death, 1915, September 29.
What's it say?
Legal electrocution. Cause of death, they electrocuted my?
Yep. We discovered that in 1913, your great-uncles, along with 3 other men, were charged with killing a Confederate Civil War veteran, a white man named John Lewis.
Pop said something about that he knew that her brother or her brothers. I'm 35% European.
A possible exception can be found in Tom Joyner's family. Tom's great-grandmother was the daughter of a slave and her owner, a white lawyer named Edward Hall.
That's my white man in the woodshed.
That is your white man in the woodshed.
Wow.
Now, your aunt told us that it was taken as fact that Jane Hall and Ed Hall had a relationship, Tom, like Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Now, in fact, your aunt said that Jane Hall was the closest thing that Ed Hall had to a wife. You know how black people claim all this stuff. Now, this is the 1870 census, Tom. And what we find is that your great-great-grandmother is living with her daughter, Janet, and her son, Robert, in the household. But can you see who is living next door?
Edward Hall?
Edward Hall, living next door. Obviously, they had a long-term stable relationship, and he couldn't marry her, so he kept her next door. After slavery.
And he didn't have a white family? You putting a lot on her, brother.
I'm not finished. Amazing as this was, you turn the page, my brother. That is Ed Hall's father, your third great-grandfather.
A Supreme Court justice in the state of North Carolina.
A Supreme Court justice in the state of...
3.
That's right. That's your ancestor. Direct. Smoking pistol.
I've looked around my family. I've never seen anybody with these eyes until just now. I haven't seen anybody in my family that have gray eyes. Had some problems and that she left
the entire Griffin family, your mama's family, picked up and left South Carolina. And the life that they built, all that land, they just split.
And what happened to the land?
Well, they had to sell the land to pay for the lawyer to defend your great uncles.
There's Tom Joyner in Plantation, Florida. I imagine you've seen that a number of times. What do you think?
It's an amazing story. What the story doesn't say is that John Lewis, a Confederate soldier that was killed by a pimp. He was having an affair with a black prostitute, and the pimp was trying to rob John Stevens, and he ended up murdering him. And to make sure that his legacy was intact, they didn't want it known. They didn't want it to be in the record books that John Stevens was having an affair with a black prostitute and killed by her pimp. And so they framed my two uncles. The guy who did it confessed in jail that he pointed out my uncles because, quote, they were the richest N-words in the town and they could afford legal representation. And my uncles had 1 day to prepare for a murder trial, and they were found guilty. There were a lot of good people in that town too, so much so that they petitioned the governor saying that it was unjust. And some of those people that signed the petition included the former sheriff of the town, a mayor of the town. There were some good people there in that town that knew that this was wrong.
I just let you speak because it's such a fascinating story, and the more you learn about it, the more amazing it is. What does this do for you? Because I can see you, I know you, and I know that the body language is telling me that you're emotional or nervous. Or what does that do for you to hear that and to find that out in that moment? You found that out right there in the taping.
I found that out in that moment. When Skip does those things, you find out right then and there what your background is. And so when I found that out, I immediately wanted to make it right for my uncles almost 100 years later. So I hired lawyers, I did my research, and we have petitioned the Pardon and Paroles Board of South Carolina. We go before the board on Wednesday morning to get my uncles posthumously pardoned.
So, to get them pardoned, and this will make you feel better, and I would imagine your family members feel better. Talk to me about that. Why?
Well, you know, it's a chapter in our life that we can finally find closure to. You see, what most of America doesn't understand is that most of Black America, we can only go back so far, and when we try to trace our genealogy. This was amazing that we actually found out about this. And old Black people back in the day never talked about their struggles. They never talked about the negative past. They only looked forward. They only looked forward to the future because they didn't have much to look back on that was happy. And so my father never knew the story about his uncles. He never knew why his mother just suddenly appeared in Central Florida in a migrant town called Plant City. And of course she married my grandfather, but he never knew the story. He knew that something had happened that made her run, but he had no idea until Skip, a year before my father passed, came to our house and gave us the results of our genealogy study.
Because of the history of the country and the way many African Americans, probably most African Americans, came into the country, many of us don't know our histories and our genealogy.
Yeah.
How does it, I would imagine, help with personal dignity to find out about your past and where you came from?
You know, I have to admit that before the O.J. trial, I knew nothing of DNA. And since then, and since Skip did my genealogy study, I have much respect for the science of DNA. You are where you are because of the people who came before you. And if you know where you have come from, you'll probably be better in the moment and better in the future. And I strongly urge anyone, African Americans or any race, to go back, find your roots, find the stories of your ancestors.
And it's an exact match. Yep.
How do you think he was captured?
Probably through a war. You know, there were African middlemen, and they would fight wars with other Africans to enslave them to sell to the white man. Slavery was a huge business for different African kingdoms. You know the story that we got when we were kids, that your ancestor was out on one Sunday with his girlfriend and some white man jumps out of the bush and throws a net over him? It's not how it happened. Slavery was big business. Africans sold other Africans to the Europeans.